You know, there's a couple of ways to study the consequences of diet on health. One is called a metabolic ward experiment. It's where you literally lock people up or take sufficient control of their life, you know that they're not cheating, and feed them in a certain way and then measure their metabolic activity over time. There's actually been a lot of locked ward experiments done that relate to cholesterol over the years. All the way back to 1965, actually. You can get a home cholesterol kit and try this out yourself. In fact, if you eat butter every day, your cholesterol will go up. It's quite simple. We've known this for 50 years. In fact, if you feed a vegetarian meat just once a day, and these studies go back before the 50s, they were done on Seventh-day Adventists. If you feed a vegetarian meat once a day over a month, their cholesterol will jump 20%. The problem is there's another kind of study that is not what's called an interventional design. In other words, you're not actually intervening in a person's life to study them. You're simply studying populations. It's called a cross-sectional design. And cross-sectional designs don't work well for cholesterol or for diet or for eating because everybody has a set baseline for how much cholesterol they've got. It's genetically set, plus dietarily and lifestyle. And so by measuring how much somebody's, by doing epidemiological, we've known since the 1970s that when it comes to cholesterol, you get noise, you get random information. So actually from 1970. So what do? Well, if you're the Cattlemen's Association or if you're the dairy industry that wants to promote more butter, how about Ronald Krauss? He was funded by the National Dairy Council since 1989. He was also the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. You get this guy to pull together a bunch of these observational studies, which have never demonstrated cause and effect between eating fat and having cholesterol, because they can't, because of the way that they're designed. They can't disprove it either. You get a bunch of these studies and do a meta-study of them. He did this in 2010. It was published. It got a lot of fanfare. Hey, fat's good for you. Kind of went away. So they said, hey, it's getting worse. We reboot this thing. So the same guy redid basically the same study in 2014 and said once again, hey, we're not finding anything. As the chair of Harvard's nutrition department put it, he said the conclusions conclusions regarding the type of fat being unimportant are seriously misleading and should be disregarded. Well, that said, there are still a lot of folks who want to say, hey, go ahead and eat some fat. Jeff Steyer is on the line with us. He's the Director of Risk Analysis at the National Center for Public Policy Research, nationalcenter.org, a conservative think tank here in Washington, D.C. Hey, Jeff, welcome.
Good to be back with you, Tom.
So tell me, why should we ignore science and go back to eating butter based on this meta study that didn't actually study one single human being?
Well, Tom, I got to hand it to you. It's always fun to listen to you set up the facts in your own way. I would give you a different perspective, unless, of course, you think the American Heart Association is also in the pocket of...
On their website right now, the American Heart Association says the more you can reduce dietary saturated fat, animal fat, the better it'll be for your heart. They're unambiguous about it.
So they've actually moved away from their recommendations.
They've moved away from the percentage recommendation that they had, but they still are taking the position that the less fat you eat, the less animal fat you eat, the better. And nobody is disputing the fact that people who eat no animal fats are actually far less likely to have heart attacks.
And also much angrier. No.
What?
But I think I'm making a joke about people who don't eat animal fat sometimes have a little frustration. But the point here is that the American Heart Association has moved away from these numbers that were saying essentially get almost no fat in your diet, get almost no saturated fat in your diet, 30% fat, and they're moving away from those very strict recommendations. In fact, we have seen over time that there have been, I know you want to do your studies on humans in a lab and put them in a lab and control what they can eat. And that's consistent, I think, from your approach, is kind of controlling how everyone lives. But in the real world, people don't live in a lab.
No, but we've actually done those studies, and we found that when people eat animal fat, their cholesterol goes up and the risk of heart attack goes up.
In your world where you control, or where the government...
No, there's a lot of people out there who are vegetarian for religious purposes. The Seventh-day Adventists, for example. Look at the Seventh-day Adventist studies. They have the lowest heart disease rate in the United States. And among the Seventh-day Adventists, the ones who are not just vegetarian, which mean that they continue to eat cheese and eggs, and dairy products, but instead are vegan, have the lowest heart attack rates in the United States, period.
So you could also conclude that being a Seventh-day Adventist is good for you. You can take all of these things and shape them the way you want, but in the real world, there has been...
You can't shape these things. They're facts.
Well, but let me tell you some other facts. And I know you don't like sharing facts that don't comport to the conclusion that you want to reach, but please just give me a moment here. Tom, when the government came in and told people on preliminary and not solid evidence that you need to drastically cut the amount of fat in your diet, especially saturated fat, people who were not living in a lab, people who live in the real world, said, oh, okay, if that's what I have to do to stay healthy. And as a result, they did cut their fat intake. But you know what happened? They increased dramatically their carbohydrate intake, and we got heavier and heavier, and that wasn't good for health. Now, what happens is the government loves to jump in based on preliminary...
Hang on just a second, Jeff. You're slightly misstating the facts here. You are right that a lot of Americans moved from a high-fat diet to a high-sugar diet, but it wasn't Americans said, gee, I think I'll eat a less fat and more sugar or more simple carbohydrates. It was that the food companies understand that fat, salt, and sugar is the holy triad, and you've got to have at least two of the three. And they started manufacturing more of these foods that produce obesity, although they may be less horrible in terms of heart disease. I mean, in 1975, the number of people per 100,000 who died of heart disease in the United States was 100 out of 100,000. It was 26% of all deaths in 1975. Today, it's 40 out of 100,000, and it's only 18% of deaths. This is, we've seen a steady decline in the rate of heart disease ever since the government started saying, reduce your fat.
I know you'll take every opportunity you can to blame industry for this, but it's really about the choices that consumers make.
No, it's
industry
not.
Industry is very...
Consumers choose what's in front of them.
So consumers have plenty of options to buy food that they think is healthier.
Not consumers who are making less than $60,000 a year.
So here's the thing. What they do is they follow the advice. Let me concede a point to you for just a moment. I'm not going to do this on a long-term basis.
We just have a minute left.
Let me concede a point quickly to you. Let's just say that industry played a role in providing different choices to consumers. Less fat, more carbohydrates, yes, with more sugar in it.
Right.
Consumers follow that. Right. Consumers follow that. My advice here on this issue is that the government isn't very good at telling people what to eat.
But McDonald's is worse.
Very good. No, I think consumers are best, and they should speak to their doctors. I think the government should all stay out of it, and consumers, with their doctors and their family perhaps, should decide how they eat. When the government gets involved in telling us what to do, we have bad outcomes. I don't think the food industry...
That is absolutely not true. There are many areas. I mean, do you want to go back to having medicine men come into town on a wagon and just roll down the back and say, "Here, buy Dr. Jeff snake oil"?
I think we'd all do a lot better if there were less government and less industry telling us.
Then you're going to have you're not going to have less industry, because the only power that can stand up to industry is government.
I think consumers can.
No, they can't. You try to take on GlaxoSmithKline. You try to take on Yum Foods. How would you do it?
By making choices. And I think by telling people that they have no ability to make choices, I think that message...
Nobody is telling people they have no ability to make choices. Jeff Steyer, hang on just a second, Jeff.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Jeff Steyer, Director of Risk Analysis of the National Center for Public Policy Research, website nationalcenter.org. Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Tom.